Alright guys, so here we've got a pile of combs and a pile of cutters. I already washed up all my 9-tooth combs. This is just all my 13s. So when you have a lot of tools, I like to separate out the combs and the cutters and then put them in 2 separate cans. So I like to use these old coffee cans just with a handle on them. They work pretty good. But just gonna put all these in our separate cans and we'll take them over to the sink and I'll show you guys how to wash them. Gonna use the hottest water we can out of the tap. We will rinse it a couple times to get all of that initial junk off and to, kind of remove some of that stuff that's caught up in the end of the cutters. Some of them you'll get some that are pretty bad, but the hottest water you can, and then we will be dumping it into that bucket because that will go outside, because otherwise you don't want to dump that down your sink because it will clog up your drain. But we'll rinse it until the water is clean, and then we'll get some soap in there and let it soak for a bit. And then for the combs, we'll just do the exact same thing. Got them just sitting. You saw how I kind of was just twisting that around just to get that soap all mixed up in there, because you don't want it to be super sudsy. You don't want to put the soap in there and then run water over it to where you have the suds, you know. Up to here, you just want the soap in there, and then I like to just twist them like that, because then it doesn't get real sudsy, but it gets that soap all mixed into the water and around all your different tools and things. So we'll let them sit like this for 10-15 minutes, and then we will get to rinsing them off and start drying them out. So one thing I wanted to point out is if you let your tools sit when they are dirty for a long time, like this one I let sit for a couple weeks, you can see just how gummy that looks, and that is what we'll be buffing out. So you can buff that out, but it's always better if you can wash your tools right away, then that corrosion doesn't form on there, because this is one that I used and then I washed it right up. So we'll still buff it out, buff out the tips and things, but you can see it's a lot cleaner than something like this. And just that little amount of gummy stuff, that will make it harder to get through that wool when you're shearing, which will make you slower shear, you know, you'll lose sheep an hour. So we'll take ones like this down and we'll buff those out, and I'll show you guys how to do that also. Got them all clean, rinsed off, got all that wool out of there, and that's just the hot water, and the soap will help to get all that junk out. So now, you know, you saw me rinse them to get all that soap off, because you don't want any soap left on these things. But now we're just going to dry them off, that way they don't rust on us, and then we'll get down to grinding. are, got everything cleaned up and dry. So here's all of our combs, and then we got our thick cutters there, and then we got some thinner cutters there. But with the combs, I do like to buff them. So here's my buffing wheel. It's I think a 1 inch, and then the buffing compound I use is this stuff right here. So that's what I'm using. Works pretty good. So we just turn it on, get some of that buffing compound on there, and then we will buff out these combs. I'll probably add a little bit more since we have so many combs to buff out. But let's get on into buffing them, and I'll show you guys how to get rid of what we were talking about. This one's got a little bit on it, but show you how to get rid of that stuff. Well, we got them all buffed. So these are some Longhorn combs. These had a little bit of rust in them, but still was able to buff them out pretty good. Got some Heinegers. Those are looking pretty good. And then we just got these veins. But yep, the main part that you need to buff out is just these tips and down to about here. This part's not as necessary. If they're real bad, I'll buff out this part just so that to, you know, keep that rust off of them. But mostly just to the bottom of here, you know, because you're cutting up here. So that'll just help it to glide through it better, but then you got your screws here and things. So yep, just kind of buff it out down to there and it should be good. So anyways, now we're going to throw our discs on the grinder and we'll get these things ground up and get them good and sharp, and then we'll sharpen up our cutters as well. So when you go to mount these on, make sure that this area is all clean, that there's nothing stuck to that. And then same with on here, make sure that that's all cleaned off, because you don't want anything messing up your surface there between where those meet, otherwise you'll get a bad grind. Throw that on there. Our washer and our nut. We'll get that good and tightened on there, and then I'll show you guys what the next step is. So we're going to start with combs. So we have this switched to our comb on the pendulum. We've got it hung, and I'm just using this thing. I was able to make my own, what Heiniger sells with their grinders. That way we can set it to the center of our post. So we'll want it about right there. So just adjust it up and down, you know, to get it right in the middle. So right now we need to go a little bit more down. So I'll just adjust that. You know, check it again. So we'll just adjust that till we get that height set right, and then we'll throw a comb on there and get the depth set right. Let's make sure this is all cleaned off. Make sure that doesn't have any metal on it. Just take our comb, attach that onto there. What we're looking for is a slight heel grind. You never want a tip grind. So when it hits the paper, you want it to hit with the heel first. So right there works. We could go a little bit further in if we wanted to, which would involve, you know, removing these and then just moving that in a little bit if you wanted to. But right there is pretty good. You just never want to tip grind. So we'll do that and see how it's hitting it, and then the tips are going on. So start with that, and then we'll start grinding. First I'm gonna run this stick over it, clean all that off, and then we'll get to grinding. Guys, I just wanted to show you 3 different ways. So we ground up some of these combs here, and I just wanted to show you. So this is one that is not ground yet. You can see where that cutter ran. You can see all the way up at the end where it ran, where it's dull. That is what we were trying to remove. And then here is, well, let me show you the one when we're finished. So this is what we're looking for when we're done. Even grind across the whole thing. You can see that little burr at the base of each tooth. It's just that line that you can kind of see there. You're looking for most of your grind lines to be pretty much up and down on that tooth. But that's what we're looking for. And then here's one that we're shearing some really gummy, dirty sheep. And so this is after one grind on the grinder. But as you can see, we can get the camera to focus here, but we have had some rocks get in there. So with that, you'll want to run it over till you get rid of all of that, because you don't want that in your combs. So you can run it over a second time, and then you can set it off to the side, let it cool down a bit, grind a few more combs, and then come back to it later. But you just want to get rid of all of that and get it down to looking like that across the whole thing. So anyways, I'll get all these ground up. Here's the 13 that I did, looking real good. So get all these finished, sharpened up, and then we'll start on the cutters. So we finished up all of our combs. Now we're going to start on our cutters. Got our discs switched over to our finer sandpaper, finer grit, and switched our pendulum to the cutter side. And then we re-centered this to the center of our shaft. And now to check to make sure it'll grind correctly, you put your cutter on there, and then we'll just add a little bit of pressure and go in the grinding motion. Doesn't take much, just a couple times. And then we'll take a look at it and see where we're sitting. So what you want is, you want to see the grind marks at both bottom corners, which is what we see here. And then you want to see it on both of the top corners, and even on those teeth are totally fine as well. But just make sure you got a total even. It doesn't have to be down there in the center because you got that hollow in there, but we've got it here and on all four corners. And so we are set at the correct depth and the correct height here. So now we can just turn it on and start sharpening. Well guys, we got a couple of these ground up and sharpened. So these are ones that are not sharp yet. Just want you guys to take a look at that. That's the way they look when they are not sharp. And then here's one that is freshly sharpened. So you're looking for that burr on the top. You can kind of see there, it's just a very faint line. You can see it down the sides too, but mostly on the tip there. That's what you're looking for a sharp cutter. So anyways, I'll finish getting all these ground up and then we'll get these all put away. But that wraps up this video for cleaning your tools and getting them buffed and sharpened. So if you guys like this sort of thing, be sure to subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next one.